DIY versus a commercial VMS. Welcome to the third of a series of videos on volunteer management and the role of technology. These videos are based on a webinar hosted by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Alberta, CPA Alberta Community Ambassadors, and other organizations. The first video provided an overview of what is a VMS. The second video looked at the size of the commercial VMS landscape and introduced the Berkey business case used in the May 28, 2024 webinar. This video will discuss Flying Canoe's efforts to build their own VMS, as well as hearing from one of the leading vendors, Volunteer Local. While each video is a standalone, it is suggested you watch them in sequence. More information about managing nonprofits or other organizations can be obtained by visiting myorgbio.org. This range of potential VMS systems was introduced in the first video of the series. Most nonprofits fall into the sweet spot between building its own online system and buying the services from a vendor, such as Volunteer Local. The Flying Canoe Volant Festival uses a Google form to collect volunteer information. The information is stored in a linked Google spreadsheet. Let's hear from the Flying Canoe and their DIY volunteer forum experiences.
Flying Canoe is a winter festival, a celebration of three pillars of the region. We call them, it's the Indigenous, Francophone, and resulting Métis cultures. It's an illuminated festival that takes place over 4 evenings here in Edmonton, in La Cité Francophone Bonnie Doon region. And it has become from 3,000 participants, visitors, in about 12 years ago, we have up to 100,000 participants in over 4 evenings of this. We have stages, we have music, we have stories, and the Flying Canoe is based on a tale of Francophone French-Canadian legend of some coureurs de bois, des voyageurs, who wanted to get home, make a pact with the devil, and of course the result is almost like ghost riders in the night. They are destined to fly the skies for the rest of eternity. As I mentioned, so it's a great story of Indigenous. They have a bewitched canoe story, a tale. The Flying Canoe is the Francophone version. And what we do is we invite those cultures, the Indigenous, Métis, as well as Francophone cultures, to present through various venues in the Mill Creek Ravine and here at La Cité Francophone. Cultural celebration, respectful of authenticity of presentation. We don't program those venues, Indigenous or Métis. We are not those cultures. We provide spaces and places for that. As I mentioned, we have about over 100,000 volunteers over 4 evenings of programming. It's an evening illumination festival celebrating a winter's night. We have about 200 volunteers, I think maximum. Wendy will speak to that. I'm the director of the festival. We have over 60 corporate sponsors, a plethora of community partners and collaborators, a very small permanent staff, which expands, as all festivals do in this region, to 50 to 60 to 80 contract staff, event staff, installation, production teams. And I'm pleased and honored to hire over 100 musicians, artists, cultural carriers, heritage performers for the duration of the evenings of the festival. Now, when it comes to volunteering, we've been very blessed to, even though it's a large, we have a 4.5 kilometer loop footprint in the ravine. Our needs for volunteers are not that huge, as Wendy will describe in the next few minutes. But my role as director of the festival, I don't get into the weeds of the volunteering. I just make sure I have answers to questions as they come up and am able to provide a resource as far as perspectives and strategies regarding roles, responsibilities, what new additions to the festival or what sort of omissions to the festival that occur year after year. And we are more than pleased to have Wendy Duthie as our volunteer coordinator for year 2 years in a row, which in this industry is something. And I pass it over to you now, Wendy. Wendy Duthie, our volunteer coordinator.
Thanks, Alan. Our festival has, like Alan said, about 200 volunteers over the course of the 4 days. One thing that's really great, though, is that all of our volunteer scheduling occurs in a short window of time, generally between 6 and 10 p.m. over those days. And so we operate with approximately 50 volunteers a night. Many of our volunteers do sign up for more than one night, which again reduces that overall pool of volunteers. So we have a really good rate of of volunteers who return, and most of them do work multiple days. We don't have a leadership structure within our volunteer corps, which I know many other festivals have a greater need for than we do. And so because of that, I am able to personally manage all of these people all at once, which I know for some people that sounds really daunting and maybe isn't practical for your event, but it is something that luckily does work for us. Our volunteers, they get a free meal, and they have honestly a simple task that is assigned to them that is both engaging and is really submersed in the festival. So they do really get a participation sense from what they're doing. Our festival has been fortunate that it has had a few key volunteers who do return year after year, who do take on that leadership in certain areas. We use a simple Google form. When I came into this festival, we were still using a PDF, and I viewed that to be a barrier to our volunteer signups. And so because I'm familiar with Google and with the Google Forms specifically, I opted into that, and mainly for the spreadsheet that it generates and how flexible that spreadsheet is. We haven't really looked into other solutions because we haven't seen, despite our festival attendance growing, our volunteer needs aren't really changing that much. I think it's really important that volunteers have a meaningful and engaging task. And so I'm very considerate about what I'm asking them to do in the time that they are so generously giving me. In short, though, Google, works for us. This is a good form for us. These are the things that are on the form. This is the information that I get straight off the bat that I can use to make all of the decisions in regards to scheduling, placement, and all of the more nuanced things that you get when dealing with humans, especially ones who are, again, donating their time. So their names, their pronouns, things like that. Obviously, your emergency information and the things that we need to provide for legal reasons. And then I think something that's really important to get from them is those accommodation needs. So it really cuts down a lot of back and forth emailing if I can just ask straight up for someone to tell me that stuff. You need a chair? Not a problem. I'm going to put you somewhere with a chair. Google collects all this stuff into a spreadsheet that I can then shuffle, rearrange, and use to make our schedule. So once I've done that, I email everybody using just a mail merge situation. I send everybody their portion of the schedule, and then I'm available to answer any questions or make any changes. Some things about, we do recognize there are some risks associated with this approach. Not letting volunteers manage their own schedule is definitely one of those things. Again, because of our size, I haven't really experienced that, but I do know that it is something that, it's also something I kind of like having that control, so I can put people where they're better suited. But part of that comes from the long relationships that we have with our volunteers too. There's definitely a little bit of a privacy concern. I know Google is a very secure program and system, but it's definitely something I know certain individuals would perhaps be hesitant to participate with us. That said, I'm a flexible person. If somebody doesn't want to participate in using the technology that we use, there are other ways for them. Obviously, they can always call the office or come on in, and we can intake them as a volunteer in another way. Again, because of our size. Finally, we do need to have staff who are capable of building this Google form, which currently I do. And I know that there's definitely some longevity questions about that. Should I leave the festival? What will I be leaving it with as far as the future information? So these are challenges that are evident in the levels of satisfaction that we have sometimes. Google's free. Honestly, it's the main reason that we use it. I have done a small amount of research into other options. There are definitely other options. But one thing I noticed with every single VMS or other form system is that it still would need a certain amount of customization and data entry done by me to get the results that I and our festival needs. And so that's why we've stuck with Google. You know, I'm curious to know, maybe there is a perfect solution out there for me, but I haven't found it yet. And because our festival is just one time a year, over 4 days, a monthly subscription service, it hasn't really made sense for us. So there you have it. That's why we use this auto manual route that we're talking about. That's all.
A Google form is low-code technology. As a VMS, it's been sufficient for flying canoe. A Google form is easy to set up, and there are many resources to help even the most cyberphobic volunteer coordinator. Google is free with a Gmail account or as part of a paid Google subscription. This is similar to the form builder technologies available via Office 365. There are just too many options available for a DIY volunteer solution. This leads to the question, if you're building your own forms to create VMS functionality, why not just buy a commercial VMS? What does a commercial VMS offer nonprofits over and above something like a Google form? Let's hear from Brian Heemsath from one of the leading VMS vendors, Volunteer Local.
So hi everybody, I'm Brian Heemsath. I am the president of Volunteer Local. I'm also the developer. We're a very small team, so I can hopefully also bring some technology perspective to this conversation. So back in 2003, I was building websites for anybody who would ask me to, and the local Des Moines Arts Festival came to me and said, we also need a way to manage our 350 volunteers that come in for the weekend. So I built a platform for them, and it worked great. They were happy with it. And so I spun it off and gave it away to local nonprofits for about 3 or 4 years. And in 2008, we accidentally, yes, accidentally, served the Hy-Vee Triathlon, which was an Olympic qualifying event that year. That got the attention of USA Triathlon as well as races all over the country. And it was my first aha moment that people might actually pay for this. This is a largely ignored space. Nonprofit software in general gets overlooked. And so we started down this path of building a solution for episodic type events. And it was acknowledged earlier, there's lots of different use cases for this. And I can tell you, after working on this for 21 years, nobody does it the same. It is a very unique problem that people try to tackle. And so we built the platform with that in mind, and then slowly over time adapted it to focus on the needs of nonprofits, particularly around the process of vetting volunteers and allowing them to apply. So with that, I'll tell you some of the things that we think you should consider and core technology considerations. So I'm going to focus on the tech side at first. So the first 5 items there, registration, shift selection, communication, hours, attendance tracking, reports, and data, are all core technology solutions that can be built or bought. But I'm going to come back and focus on the volunteer experience in a minute, because that is really the core thing. On the registration side, you need basic information captured. So contact information, maybe you need documents uploaded, certain certifications or certificates that they may be having as a PDF file that needs to be uploaded. So sometimes just a simple form isn't enough. Also signatures on waivers. So if you're going to have any sort of risk assessment where someone could get injured and your lawyers have added value to your event by saying we need these signatures on file, that's another consideration for the registration process. The shift selection, which is also tied into the volunteer experience, serves 2 purposes. One, it makes you more organized and coordinated if you can build out your schedule. So as Wendy mentioned earlier, 6 to 10 at night across multiple days, if you can build that out, you're now working backwards to host a very well-run event because you're well-staffed. So some of this starts with just understanding the basics of shift scheduling. And then once you've built that out administratively, you now have something that you can present to the volunteer on the experience side. Some considerations for shift selection. So the schedule itself, am I qualified to do certain positions? How many spots are available? Am I allowing group volunteering? So can I bring my kid? Can I bring a group of coworkers? And then do we need to lock down certain shifts with passwords, maybe because they are part of a corporate sponsorship package? So those are considerations for your shift selection. On the communication side, this can't be overstated. Your communication is your most important piece. Staying in touch with your volunteers not only makes them informed, will build the bond with your organization. So as you try to retain these volunteers year over year, they're going to remember your communication just as much as they will remember the experience that they had when they volunteered for you. So email, of course, is a common thread. SMS is a little tricky. It's a great way to reach people, but you do need to opt people in. So that can be tricky. But targeted messages, reminders, the timeliness of this, and the ability to what we call transactional messages. So building out templates of things that happen in real time that you're not typing the same message over and over again, and you can push templates out to people. Hours and attendance tracking. This is more of a nice to have. It depends on what your needs are, but not only do you want to track that possibly to reward volunteers with years of experience or how many hours they've put in a given time frame, you might also need this for grants. And so being able to prove out we had 1,000 volunteers and they committed this many hours, that grant writing may depend on your hours and your attendance tracking. Reports and data, this should be pretty straightforward, but the benefits obviously to the organization is having good data. You're trying to make decisions about scheduling people. And also data includes integrations. So what integrations do you need to have? And do you have access to the data either to just pull it out of a system and use it somewhere else, and or what integrations already exist? And then finally, the volunteer experience. Let's move on. Thank you. So this is really important because these are people, as we said earlier in the presentation, they're giving their time, right? They have elected and say, I'm going to give you one of the most valuable resources I have, which is my time, maybe even their knowledge, applying it to something that maybe is a little more complicated than just standing near an entrance booth and making sure people go the right way. So that volunteer experience has to be a core focus. So one blurb about us, we are a passwordless system for the volunteer. So when a volunteer registers, everything is link-based. It's an encrypted link that the volunteer uses to see their profile. They can update information within their registration if you need them to. They can also see their whole schedule if you allow them to cancel their shift or check out or check in. These are all things that they can do from a profile, which again for us is passwordless. So if you're looking at a VMS that does have an account creation process with a password, that's one thing to think about. How easy is that to manage? If you've ever really worked anywhere and forgotten your password or can't recover it, that's a huge hurdle that no one should have to go over. So there's a plug for us. One thing though that I think is really, really key to the volunteer experience. So as far as the next piece here, if you're thinking through this is really a volunteer management system is like a CRM. Now, we don't market ourselves as a CRM because I don't want to go and compete with the HubSpots and the Salesforce of the world. We are a volunteer management solution. And so that, though, includes a core component of CRM. But again, we're not just building a database. We want to build this experience. And if anybody's never seen it before, KISS is keep it simple, stupid. So always keep about how can we make this a really good experience for them and keep it really, really simple. This goes without saying, but you need to be mobile. The impetus to volunteer might strike somebody at the right time because a friend told them, they scanned a QR code, they heard a radio ad, whatever it might be that drives them to volunteer, you've got to capture that excitement and interest in the moment. And that might only be available on their mobile phone. So that has to be something that's consistent throughout the process, is like giving them a mobile experience. And then I mentioned earlier communication. So not only are you, so the Wendy's of the world, right? She is really the most valuable part of the volunteer experience for that organization. The fact that she's here for year 2, that's awesome. Hopefully they keep her around for as long as she wants to be. And so giving her the right tools, and she would probably tell you communication with the volunteers is really, really important with making that experience. What I heard is there are then what we call captains or other users in the platform, right? There's a dissemination of people bringing their family and friends to volunteer, giving them tools to communicate, not necessarily all the parts of a VMS, but allowing your leaders to really distribute, and they become promoters. I hate to use that example, but they really are in a way becoming a promoter of your opportunity. Right. So now let's talk about the Wendy's of the world. These, again, are the most important people because they are doing the hard work and they are probably a volunteer themselves. And I can't speak for Wendy, but I know a lot of our customers, the volunteer directors are a volunteer. And so if you value their time, you need to make sure they have the right technology. Whether you're building, buying, or piecing together a solution, you need to really honor them and make sure they have the right tools to do their job, because you'll otherwise burn them out and they won't come back the next year, and you're not really building a program at that point. As far as a case for a VMS, do you want to learn multiple platforms, or do you want to have everything in one platform? It's a lot easier to train on one than to have to put together multiple platforms. On our side, support is included. So we provide unlimited support within our platform. We even answer the phone. And so you got to think about who is the person that maybe volunteered 3 years ago and built something for you or pieced something together. When they go, who's now responsible for picking that up? Things like annual maintenance, building new features, those are all part of a solution or benefit to having a VMS do that. So as I mentioned, I'm a technical person. So finding volunteers with technical talent is really, really hard. And again, the longevity of how long will that person be around is something to consider. So if you can find a technical volunteer that says, we want to build this, I'm not against that at all. I wouldn't talk you out of it, but just have the scope of like, how much are we asking of this person? Can they really hit all the milestones we needed to hit? And then the last thing, they're balancing your resources. It was the Des Moines Arts Festival director. She was very aggressive on the fundraising front. And she said, nonprofit is a mindset. It's really just a tax status. She thought very much like a for-profit business and would invest in the right areas that allowed them to work more efficiently, so you can do more with less. She was a staff of 3 at that time, and she knew that investing or spending money on something that freed up their time to do other things was a valuable use of those funds. I'll just wrap up here. We've been around a really long time. We serve lots and lots of customers. These are some of the customers in Canada that we've been working with for anywhere from 1 year to longer. And we appreciate the opportunity to hopefully speak on behalf of the whole industry, but also too, if you want to learn more about us, you can take a look at our website, volunteerlocal.com. And on that next slide, again, just to remind you to get your shifts together. So thank you.
Flying Canoe and Volunteer Local were 2 presenters at the CPA Alberta Conference. A panel further explored select topics. The following are highlights from 3 panelists, Charles, Dan, and Allison. Note that some of the topics covered in the panel discussion are covered in the volunteer lifecycle video, which follows this one.
One of the biggest issues for the Burking considering this, we have for many years, we had a sustainability discussion in 2020, and this is one of the suggestions that came up. And of course, the questions are, who's going to manage it? My questions to Brian would be, how much process is there in developing this system to meet our specific needs?
Yeah, so 20 plus years of building this, you can imagine there's layer upon layer upon layer. And so we've tried to build the right tools to accommodate your processes as our prospect. However, we also encourage you to take this opportunity, whatever you're moving to or working with, to maybe fix or change some of the processes that have been drug along for any reason. So it's two-sided. We should be able to map to what your processes are, but also might look to you to say, hey, is it a good time to change the way you think about texting?
Fully half of our volunteers are recruited by other groups. They're recruited by our partner service groups like Edmonton Overlander Orienteering, Alberta Trail Riders, Sherwood Park Progress Club. You mentioned the word captain. How do you manage these subgroups?
That is something the software takes care of. So the captains actually can log into Volunteer Local if you want to add them as a user. We have a new feature that's coming out next month called group reservations. So you might have a leader that is the group reservation who doesn't need the full access. So it's a lot easier to use the system. They just get a link that they share with their group to say, here's the link, go sign up along with this password. So it depends on the complexities. The boards are usually outside of our software. We haven't baked that into it. We will give you the data of the hours and the shifts. So whether it's a free ticket to the festival for volunteering so many hours, people love t-shirts. It depends how heavy the lift is, but if you make a really cool, unique t-shirt, I know that sounds silly, but people will be proud of that. I'm wearing a unicorn t-shirt from a local music festival here because I'm really, proud of the efforts we've done with them. And so it doesn't have to be complicated, but people want to be appreciated, right? They volunteered for a reason. They gave you your time. Now show them just enough love. Pizza parties afterwards. Again, tickets maybe to another partner event. Those are some ideas that are usually outside of our software.
Talking about the captains, and I mean, we have currently within the Berkey, within our group of chiefs of the law pit, very, very different ranges in styles, organizational styles. I'm just wondering have you found in the past working with other organizations adapting, or has your system adapted to those very, very different styles of people?
Yeah, I'll admit it's an evolution. We've been working with Ironman for a very long time. They're very heavily reliant on captains. And I've heard every year I join them for the call to get the feedback. And I hear, every year the low tech have great feedback of how we can lower the bar even better. The ones now that have done it for a while are like, yep, we just get in. There's a learning curve to any system, right? And so it maybe comes down to training and making sure a VMS or whether you built your home built system, is that leader or vendor really willing to train the trainer or train all the captains and be there for them.
So Volunteer Alberta, we're an organization that supports nonprofits in their screening, resources development. We are not a magical source for volunteers, as much as a lot of people like to say. Every organization is going to be unique and what their needs are and how they build and use their volunteers within a thing. So I'm going to just kind of talk about some highlights and things to think about as you kind of decide what volunteer management system is going to be the best for you. Start with the basics. A volunteer management system is not magically going to solve and recruit 1,000 volunteers for you. It's going to really depend on your relationships that you have built as an organization, what the impact of your organization is on the community, and how you share those stories and what the stories of your volunteers are, and that human approach. So having a human like Wendy, who is sticking there at Flying Canoe for a few years and being that human and getting to know their volunteers is probably actually more useful in a lot of ways than a database system, but they're both important. So I find before you even start looking at, oh, we need a volunteer management system, is looking at your organization. First part of getting on your website, introducing, to the very end of officially becoming a volunteer, look through that whole process and figure out where your roadblocks are as an organization. Are there things that you take a lot of time and you wish that could be more efficient? Are there places that you just feel a little stuck, or places where you're losing your volunteers? Those are good signals of where you might need a volunteer management system. And so kind of put that list in it. So it might be things like, it takes a lot of time to personally email all these volunteers. So maybe having a more streamlined communication approach might be the place for you. Volunteers, you might also hear from your volunteers feedback that they'd really like to sign up for their own shifts and they don't like the manual shifts thing. That's kind of a trend that seems to be moving in our system, but it's not going to work for every organization. So think of those roadblocks, create that thing, and then I'd say, then look at your resources, budget, and time of your staff and the budget of your organization and find the volunteer management system that's right for you. Other things that you might need to consider is also the buy-in of your current volunteers. You don't want to lose that volunteer base that you've already established with changing a system. So make sure you have the buy-ins of your current volunteer specialist. Setting up a new account with a password might lose some volunteers. So making sure you get that communication and that feedback and all that stuff before you start making any real decisions. Other things that might be really important and becoming more important are things like making sure the data that you have on your volunteers, they know that it's safe and secure. So having that trust of your volunteers for where that data is stored. And depending on your organization and your policies, where that data is stored from a PN system is going to be important as well. And also just from that, I always like to say it's also important to look at the data you're storing and make sure you don't store any unnecessary data. And then you just have to accept that change is constant. Change is always going to happen in this industry. So there's always going to be the fancy new tools. There's going to be a change as new demographics start volunteering. As our alpha generation starts volunteering, they're probably going to want and need things differently than our next generation. So think about that kind of stuff. You have to always be flexible and adapt, and that's kind of a quick summary.
In this video, we heard about two different approaches to managing volunteers. Wendy and Alan from Flying Canoe talked about the cost of savings and the control they had building their own VMS solution. Brian from Volunteer Local discussed the benefits of a commercial VMS and the decades of experience a good vendor can bring to a nonprofit. Which should your organization select? Before answering the question, perhaps your organization should first consider the life cycle of your volunteers and where are pain points. The volunteer life cycle will be discussed in the next video. In the previous videos, the broader question of what is a VMS and a business case was used to highlight this process. Other videos in the series include What is a Volunteer Life Cycle? And you can watch the full May 28th, 2024 VMS webinar in the 5th video.
Ha 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 ha!